What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and recently there's been an article floating around that not only openly calls gamers uninformed morons, but it paints a picture that we're all wrong and we should all just sit down and shut up. I caught wind of this recently from Legacy Killa HD's most recent video about this. I'll leave a link in the description to that if you'd like to see it. Legacy also spoke a little about IGN discrediting me as well, so here's that clip.
IGN's original thread, they mentioned another YouTuber, Endymion TV. I apologize if I said that wrong. And they also mentioned Young says he never talked about this. And then the specific YouTuber Endymion wasn't mentioned anymore, I guess because he has controversial content. I don't know why IGN did that. It's ridiculous. You obviously watched his content. You credit him. Why would you take that out? Makes no sense to me. Ridiculous. But anyway, he said, it's true. I just didn't want to wade through that part. I guess he didn't want to mention other YouTubers that covered it. Well, maybe you should mention the article that really ignited all of this to begin with.
I just want to say thank you to Legacy for covering this, and it's crazy for me to see him even knowing who I am. I've been a big fan of his for years, well before I even attempted this crazy YouTube nonsense. So go subscribe to him if you haven't already, but like I said in his video, he talked about a certain article that when I heard it, I had to go and give it a read. The article is titled, "Yelling is not journalism, there was an opportunity to give players context for why games release the way they do, but instead it was designed to incite anger directed at a few devs." And the writer of this piece is Brandon Schofield. Can't say I've heard of them, but there you go. Also, please don't harass this person. However, let's definitely pick apart what they say constructively here. And warning in advance, I'm about to get very spicy. Anyway, this article very evidently tries to paint the picture that players are uninformed and that IGN's video about Baldur's Gate 3's quality was only done to stoke gamer fury. They also, of course, liken the entire situation to Gamergate, because anything they disagree with should just simply be thrown under that labeling, and it conveniently means they can discredit it. They then throw the originator of this entire fiasco under the bus, which is the dev Xavier Nelson Jr., the guy who basically started this whole discussion up with his tweets, or X, or whatever they're called now. Brandon says Xavier's tweets are irresponsible and don't give a lot of good context simply because he's an indie dev and not a AAA one. Which already we're seeing this hierarchy nonsense taking root. As if simply because a dev is not working on some mega million-dollar game that their opinions hold less weight now. Not to mention that indie games have largely been outperforming AAA ones not only in original ideas, but also in terms of quality or breadth of content. Hollow Knight is an indie game, yet it has more meat on its bones than some of the best AAA games. And the polish of Hollow Knight very evidently puts most modern AAA games to shame. Let's not forget that Hades is also indie too. And many would argue Hades is quantum leaps ahead of most AAA games released today in terms of quality and quantity. And then you have games like Chained Echoes, which is bigger than most RPGs these days. It's just, indie games are amazing, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. Saying someone's opinions are less valued simply because what they're working on has a smaller budget means nothing. If two carpenters are working on a sculpture, regardless of the quality of the wood that they're using, they're both still carpenters. And like I said, indie games are killing it these days and actually meeting player expectations far more often than these high and mighty AAA games do anyways. I mean, Vampire Survivors and Valheim are both considered indie games, yet they've sold in the millions, which is insanely impressive. Is Shovel Knight suddenly not as impressive because it was kickstarted? By this same metric, Larian's earlier success stories like Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 should then be considered less than other games because they too were kickstarted instead of having the massive backing of a Blizzard or Microsoft. This annoyingly on-brand superiority complex that these devs and modern journos have is frankly just pathetic at this point. For players, the fact indie games oftentimes deliver is proof that what's being made in those spaces is absolutely of quality. It doesn't matter if the game has famous actors in it or super advanced tech behind its systems. In the end, people just want a game that's fun and works. It's really not that deep. I love how any sort of criticism against the accepted gaming dev belief system is angry gamer language. They really do try to make their customers seem like they're apes in a pit just raging, instead of seeing them as normal people who just want what they paid for to work. Like, imagine if suddenly thousands of Honda cars just died and their engines were burning, their tires were falling off, and their GPS systems were out of whack. And the CEO of Honda goes, "Wow, you're all such entitled babies. Stop being little annoying bitches, please and thanks, unless you know how a car is made to the last detail. You should just shut up and accept it." Like, what? We spent the money so you can do what you do. How the hell is that entitled? I used to work in restaurants as a server. If someone's food wasn't to their liking, I wouldn't toss the food in their face, or say they don't know what they're talking about. I fix the problem and get the kitchen to refire it because they're a customer. It's not their job to know every detail behind the scenes when they buy something. They paid the money, so they deserve to get what they paid for. Why is that so hard to believe for these devs and journos? Brandon then goes on to say that the gist of why this is happening is, games release in imperfect states because devs either run out of money or the shareholders of their parent company mandate that a game must come out in a certain window, which devs have no control over. They run out of money trying to make the best game possible in the least amount of time. Devs rarely control their own budget and they are trying to make as much cool stuff as they can with the time they are allotted. I explained this already in my previous video about Larian Studios being a privatized company, and it's true. Shareholders are obviously to blame for rushed schedules and meeting quotas, but it's also the management and devs' jobs to ensure they don't take on way more than they can chew. Brandon then tries to invalidate Larian's success by saying the game was funded via early access, and it gave the devs the time and money to make the product the way it is. While I'm personally not crazy about early access models, this design clearly worked for them, and it allowed Larian to have multiple dev videos explaining how the game was coming along. And this open line of communication between Larian and the customer allowed the game's design to flourish. Should we not be celebrating that Larian found a way to champion both the customer's expectations and money while also meeting demands? They make it seem like having talented developers and good studio morals is somehow a bad thing to have. There's also this other really annoying argument I've heard from devs on Twitter saying Baldur's Gate 3 is the culmination of Larian's work for years. So it's impossible to replicate, but like, that's what making games is though. That's what life is too. Everything you do and experience shapes you. The same can be said for a studio as well. By this same design philosophy, then From Software's success with Elden Ring, for example, is now invalidated, because it's not wholly a new thing but uses animations and weapons and harkens to the DNA of FromSoft's previous works. So what then? Elden Ring isn't amazing because it expertly builds upon the design philosophies that FromSoft has become known for? Things like challenging bosses, no hand-holding exploration, and deep lore with a show don't tell method. Of course Elden Ring is going to be the culmination of FromSoft's fruits of labor. It exists because they made it. In Larian's case, it's the same thing. BG3 uses a lot of the designs and ideas from Divinity Original Sin 1 or 2. That doesn't invalidate its greatness or somehow lessen it. We're not saying every game dev ever now must make a game just like BG3. What we're asking is that if you work at a AAA studio, which also means your studio has delivered big games that have been successful in the past, of course, unless it's their first game, which is a variable, but largely speaking, this means these studios, whether it's Naughty Dog or places like Ubisoft, they all have core design philosophies that are baked into their games. And they should be able to meet Baldur's Gate 3's quality, maybe not to a one-to-one replication, but for God's sake, the quality of the work should be similar. And I know what some dev watching this is going to think, you're setting impossible standards. I'm not really. What I'm saying is that these AAA studios have quite literally no excuse to not release polished products. I understand an indie studio can't necessarily meet it because obviously their budgets are much smaller, as are their teams. But Ubisoft, Blizzard, Activision, and more can't? What? Brandon even invalidates his own argument here where he says, Tears of the Kingdom, why was this so polished? Because Nintendo has literal billions of dollars in cash reserves. They can afford to take as long as they want on a game because they have the money to do so. They don't have to sell the game right now to make money for development, they already have money and can afford a longer development cycle. You just said in your own article that big publisher AAA gaming studios can afford longer development cycles and have the money to do it. So you agree that, like Nintendo, other massive companies can also do the same thing. Are we really going to sit here and act like Activision Blizzard doesn't have the money to ensure Diablo or Overwatch ends up as amazing products? A company that makes well into the billions every year on microtransactions alone? Not to mention pushing new Call of Duty games that somehow keep breaking previous sales records all the time? We shouldn't expect them or Electronic Arts, who pushes copy and pasted sports games every year and makes well over $1 billion in microtransactions alone? Are we really going to bend over backwards and suck off these mega corpos and try to defend their dogshit practices? What the hell are you weirdo journals even defending here anymore? These companies absolutely have the power to deliver premium content to their customers. And it's not that they're unable to do so, it's that they choose to not do it. There's a big difference here. I hope that's easy to understand. But my brother in Christ, you can't tell me billion-dollar studios and publishers can't meet expectations. That's literally insane to even say. Sounds more like you're protecting the corporations than the people who keep your lights on, is what it seems like to me. Like, you disprove yourself twice, right after the Zelda bit where you say, "From Software, their past success has led them to be given a blank check, and a ready-when-it's-ready attitude. Most studios are not given these sorts of timelines, but this only comes after multiple massive successes." So you mean like every major successful AAA studio publisher ever in the existence of gaming? You're telling me Call of Duty doesn't make enough money to ensure the games work at launch? Like how Electronic Arts fired over 200 Respawn QA testers back in February? And then coincidentally, Respawn's future imminent releases after this, like Jedi Survivor and future Apex seasons, suffered in quality. The same EA, where I can pull up articles from 2020, for example, showing that they made over $1 billion in microtransactions. Then I can pull up another article from 2021 where, surprise, they made another billion in microtransactions. Or you know what? How about we go even further back to 2016, where EA made $1.3 billion in microtransactions again. So can we stop playing stupid and just admit that these companies are making billions and not investing nearly enough in actually giving their paying customers products that should absolutely work at release? Are you really going to dick ride that hard for these corpos and do Olympian level somersaults, trying to twist the success of Baldur's Gate as some conspiracy Gamergate nonsense? Are you really sure that's the way you want this to go? Or, where later on in your article you even say, the point from Zolavier is not that gamers should lower their standards. The point is that to think of Baldur's Gate as an immaculate, polished release out of the gate is incorrect. And if you held other games to that standard, it would not make sense after all. Baldur's Gate 3 took 3 years from early access launch at $60 to where it releases in a polished state. Put simply, other games cannot be held to that standard because that standard is illusionary. So you mean it's illusionary that Baldur's Gate was made in that time slot? When, if you take how long the average AAA game takes to develop, which is roughly 3 to 5 years, this means BG3's entire dev cycle falls in line with every other AAA game being made today. And then, if you try to use the excuse that BG3 reuses assets or designs from games like Divinity, as if every other AAA studio making safe sequels to their games or even new projects aren't also reusing assets and animations all the time as well. So what exactly is illusionary here then? Our expectations, or your inability to wrap your head around your own lies? Because I'd love to know. And you end your article by saying there was an attempt given by IGN, but you expect nothing less from a post-Gamergate world. You know what's funny actually, is that all I've seen online is that everyone unanimously agrees with IGN on their video. Like, there's tons of people on Twitter saying it's the best video IGN has made in literal years. That for once a major publication actually used their platform to speak on behalf of players everywhere. Brandon and the other yes men who say expecting polish and quality in today's games are completely wrong in my opinion. Baldur's Gate 3 was made in the same dev cycle as your Ubisoft copy and pasted games and your Diablo 4s. Actually, I think Diablo 4's development cycle was even longer. Let me check. Yup, it was. There's absolutely zero excuse whatsoever for any of these games to not at the bare minimum work and function properly before they're sold to customers. The fact this industry is so ass backwards it's staring into its own butthole proves that we still got a lot of work to do when it comes to fixing the greedy and oftentimes disrespectful nature of corporations and the customers that fund them. I will not defend Activision Blizzard or your EAs when they've proven time and again that they don't care about the player experience. It makes me nervous just thinking about the future of Dragon Age and Mass Effect games, for example. I truly hope they don't release anywhere close to the typical modern AAA standard. Please, developers, executives, whoever the hell is watching this, we just want our games to work and not run like ass. We're not saying you need to make Skyrim level worlds every time, just that our expectations are already in the grave. How much further down do you really want to dig before it's too late? I hope this video helps you understand. I truly think Brandon's article here is wrong, and we need to hold these companies even more accountable than before. We all deserve better, devs, players, everybody. Let's not fight each other, but expose the real problem, the greedy ones at the top. If that doesn't change, nothing will. So thank you for watching, and let me know what you think as always. Subscribe for more in the future, like the video to help the channel out, and have a great day. That's 2 videos in a row, so yes, I'm tired. I will see you guys in the next one.